Hi, I'm Anne Griffin, and this is actually a video that accompanies one of the blog articles I recently wrote about the next 100 years of innovation, especially rooted in AI. Overall, the blog is going to be talking about AI, technology, and all sorts of other innovation. And I'm actually very fortunate today to have Dongwoo Kim here today. Very excited. I'll have him introduce himself, but I'll give myself a quick intro. Again, I'm Anne. I'm a product leader based out of New York City. I've worked in 0 to 1 startups as well as Fortune 500 companies across B2C as well as B2B. And I've led some really impactful product teams. And I'm super excited here today to speak with Dongwoo. If you want to give yourself an introduction, I would love for everyone to understand more about who you are and like how you tie into the topics in this article, which I know I interviewed you for.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Anne, for giving me, the space to talk about things that I find interesting. My name is Dongwoo. I'm currently a JD student at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. But before coming to law school, I worked at a think tank called the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, where I was looking at AI strategies, AI ethics in East Asia as it pertains to Canadian foreign policy between 2017 and 2021. And I was also working on my PhD, which was looking at the international relations around AI governance. So I had a lot of time to think about AI policies, and then I came to law school. I might be a little bit outdated, but I'm still excited to chat about anything that's related to AI in political science.
Awesome, awesome. Anything else you need to add? Because I know you have a lot of affiliations, and we just want to make sure that
Oh yeah.
we like dot our I's and cross our T's.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I'm obviously like participating in this conversation as as me. It's all things that I've thought about during my research, so it shouldn't be attributed to any organization that I am currently affiliated with or will be affiliated with. So, thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah.
No, no problem, no problem. You and I first met at actually AI on a social mission in Montreal in 2019 before generative AI kind of blew up the whole conversation
Hmm.
about AI. And your talk stood out to me, especially regarding Asia's investment in AI and also how many countries globally see, and even back then, saw AI innovation as the key to like where we're going to be headed in terms of not just technology, but also power in the 21st century. And
Hmm.
I've thought about that a lot, and especially more recently. And we may get to about this today or not, but even more recently, Saudi Arabia announcing, investing like what $40 billion in AI as well. So
Hmm.
it's obviously everyone thinks this is really important, and so with everything else, that we see innovation in, why is AI specifically such a key element to power, and geopolitics in this century?
Yeah, that's a big question. I just want to backtrack a little bit to maybe 2017. So that's when I started my research, and it was thanks to my supervisor at the time, who was very she had great visions about what how policy discussions would shape out. And even in 2017, we didn't have much of a literature on AI and policy. Like it was not a thing. Mostly, people were starting to get excited about the Chinese national policies coming out, where Beijing was promising a lot of investments and really like a unified idea as to what they were gonna do with artificial intelligence. So part of the reason as to why I'm sort of rambling or going in tangents is because it reflects the nature of AI, right? It's not just one thing, but I like using the Korean saying, like, if you put it on your nose, it'll be a nose ring, and if you put it on your ear, it'll be an earring. If you go to like the market, you see how AI is going to be a very exciting factor that you can look at, and how it'll change the market. But also, like, if you apply it to public government, like public services, it could be a tool for government administration, and also it could drastically transform, or it is already transforming education. So I think policymakers got really excited about the potential to upgrade their competitiveness, and they really saw this as a this is how we get to the next level. Vladimir Putin said, I think in 2018, 2019, that whoever rules AI will rule the world or something like that. And obviously, he was thinking a lot about the military application. But again, like the conversations around AI being dual use technology points to this fascinating nature of AI in the sense that you don't just develop AI for civil purposes, but you can use what you have developed in the civil area to military applications. So it's really creating a very interesting conundrum for policymakers, because they're so used to thinking about these issues as, okay, I do agriculture, I only look at agriculture, or I do, I don't know, like environment, so I'm just focusing on environment. But AI is now becoming a thing where it's happening everywhere, but how do you address that in a coherent manner? And it's impossible to approach that in the same way that they did it before. um, and I think that's what got people like excited about
Yeah.
talking about AI in the policy arena.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's sort of my spiel about in response to your question as to why this matters.
Awesome. Thank you. And one of the other things you've also talked about, because you talked about different, different leadership in different countries and
Mhm.
their, maybe what they were thinking about when they were like, yeah, I want to invest in this, or why is AI so important? But, given, your past affiliations and everything, you obviously talked a lot about also how, like, how this ties into how Asia sees AI, but also how that ties into like,
Mhm.
how they see society, community ethics, and how that's going to play a role in like the type of innovation that they do in AI, and how that may, I'll say, like come from like a different angle than
Yeah.
maybe like how a much more individualistic place like the United States might see AI. So like can you go in a bit deeper about, how that could like play out, and how, the West might be either surprised or, just develop things differently?
Yeah, for sure. And the my usual like caveat going into this discussion is that it's really hard to like generalize all of Asia and under like a single like it's not just one thing or the other, because there used to be an argument that, oh, it's so much easier to do AI in China because
Mm.
people don't care about privacy, but that's not true. Like people in China do care about their privacy, but they operate in a very different political and economic and social setting that limits their choices. And then they react to it in a way that would be different from how people do it in the United States. But it doesn't mean that they don't care about privacy. So that's like initially I was looking at AI, AI issues from the cultural angle. I
Mhm.
was really fascinated by that idea about, oh, like, do Chinese people really not care about privacy?
Yeah.
Um, but I realized that it becomes a little more difficult to make uh, empirical or accurate arguments about culture just because it's so nebulous. But there are some things that we can point to and sort of guide our thinking as to how we should be comparing like the Asian approach to that of North America or Europe. Uh, there's a study from Oxford that polled people around the world on their attitudes towards AI.
Mhm.
And what was really interesting was that in Asia, like the Asian region, people have a much more positive idea of AI than in the West. The question
Interesting.
was phrased as, "Do you think AI will be harmful for the future?" And there was about, if I remember correctly, about 20% discrepancy between the responses from Asia and Europe, or Asia and North America. And there's a lot of literature by people who are much smarter than me on as to why that is from the cultural perspective.
Interesting.
So the one thing some people point to the Asian traditions of Shintoism, where things having a life or non-human entities having human qualities is not necessarily weird. Like it's
Mm,
part of the lores that you grow up with. But in case of the Europe or North America, a lot of people are Christians or Christianity is embedded within the culture. So the idea of giving human-like life to a non-human is almost like an affront to God.
wow.
So I think those types of anxieties are worth taking into consideration. I think it's really interesting. But I think from the political science perspective, what is more interesting is the concept of developmental state.
Mm,
So when Asia started to modernize, there was a lot of trauma stemming from colonization or attempts to colonize, and Asian countries realized that, oh, we are like way behind Europeans or North Americans, and we have to catch up. But how do we do that? So they it started in Japan, where they centralized their mode of governance, and then they brought in key players from the private sector, the conglomerates, the jaibatsu, and then the government and the private sector. They collaborated very closely in order to increase their competitiveness
mm,
vis-a-vis the United States or other parts of the world, so that they could catch up to the rest of the world. And we see that in replicated in South Korea, Singapore, and in a very different way, but similarly in China, where the government is collapsing that boundary between the
mm,
private sector and the public sector in order to push forward a common agenda. And we see that with AI. Even when I was working at the foundation before coming to law school, I did a review of the strategies in Japan, South Korea, and China, and they were releasing very big scale national policies on, okay, so the Ministry of Education is going to integrate AI and code teaching K to 12 by 2030, and the Ministry of Industry will do this, and then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will establish a program that's going to connect AI like leaders in Canada or the United States with our own scientists, and then that was all coming like under like a broad plan.
yeah.
And at that time, I really, and I still think that that gives an edge because again, we are really grappling with the challenge of governing AI when there are different government ministries and bureaus that are using AI. But when if the Asian governments have the capacity to centralize their efforts
Mm,
and collaborate with the private sector and the public sector to move along, then I don't think it's unreasonable to think that they'll have an edge
mm.
in this area. What do you think?
Um, I think it'll be really interesting because this actually ties into one of the things I wanted
Mhm,
to talk about also is like I think a lot of this will also depend on like what direction different countries and even regions are going to go in with regulation as well as not just regulation but like how they choose to support. Like we've talked about many countries actually, you know, incentivizing certain types of innovation, but I think there is like, you know, regulation and how this plays out and what can be used in which regions and even getting down to like the training data or like being transparent or lack of transparency in the training data. I think um it's I would say like it's still very unclear like who the winners might be.
mhm. Yeah, and I think it's such a challenging question too because there's so many different interests in play.
Yeah.
In case of the European Union, they have been very proactive and that they see themselves as a first mover, and they did introduce their AI Act fairly quickly, and that does affect how other countries think about their regulation, how they
Mm,
should frame it, so that it's compatible, or at least allows their
mm.
private sector actors to engage with the EU market. So I think that'll have an effect. So I think it'll really come down to like how the in case of Asia, how they will balance the external pressures
Yeah.
that we have seen in like in relation to globalization, right?
Mm,
In order to do free trade, you have to give up some of the old ways of doing things and align yourself to how other people do things, right?
yeah.
But at the same time, they do have their structures and the ways of doing that worked out really. Like the developmental state is interesting because uh, thinking about my grandparents in who are from Korea, 1950s, one of the poorest countries in the world, and within like 50 years, the same generation that went through like devastating poverty, they're now
Yeah.
using cell phones, smartphones, they doing their banking on like a super integrated like mobile
Yeah.
app.
They were actually
Um,
some of the first, early adopters of cryptocurrency, and I remember I think South
yeah,
Korea had to put regulations in place because, older South Koreans were, a little too, advanced in crypto and maybe, were,
yeah.
it was a little bit of a risk for retirement money, but they're very, yeah, like you said, a dramatic change
Mhm.
to, that from being like, where they are now.
Absolutely. And and a lot of people attribute that to the government having good policy, right?
Mhm.
It's not just people working hard or the market doing its job, but the government planning things and then delivering something that they were promised, that you're not going to go to bed hungry, your children will be better off than before. So there's that element of legitimacy, and there's greater expectation as to what the government will be doing for the citizens, so they'll
Mm.
have to meet. So really, the policymakers will have to decide. Okay, the European Union or even like the United States, they want us to align with them on AI governance, but at the same time, we have these domestic needs, and the expectations are high. So
Yes.
it'll be a tough balancing act, and also especially with China, um, which has become a very sensitive topic of conversation. But China has that tension with the rest of the world that they'll have to somehow deal with. And I can't comment on China just because it's so complicated,
Mm.
and I have not uh, you know done like research more recently. But
Mhm.
I definitely think that the so-called like quote unquote Cold War uh,
Yeah.
thing will be a factor for the Chinese policymakers, right?
Yeah, yeah. And one question I have for you is in this globally competitive
Mhm,
landscape, what are things that both individuals, companies, policymakers should be thinking about when it comes to AI policy? What should be the things that they are thinking about, looking for if they're like, I want to tell my government to do this, or lawmakers that they should be thinking about that.
mhm,
Because obviously this is so new to a lot of other people, and they're overwhelmed and like what should they be thinking about, because I think maybe even like the policy part isn't something
mhm.
some people have thought that in depth until they started worrying about ChatGPT taking their job.
Absolutely. I mean, again, like there's so many ways of going about it, but for me, the key thing that I would emphasize is that we need to be more holistic about what competitiveness will be. It goes beyond the numbers on the GDP growth, or like number of jobs generated. It's we need to, just because everyone will be using AI will become part of their lives. Even in my school now, like ChatGPT is a huge topic of conversation. In that context, if everyone is using it, it's like electricity, it's like water, it's like internet, then we have to learn how to use it well, and it'll have impact on how we do things together. So I think being competitive is not just about, being so good at like having the best company going public, and having the market influence
Mm.
outside of whatever country you're based in, but also thinking about, are we teaching kids how to use AI properly? Like, are we creating a social environment where AI is not being blamed for increasing polarization between people, but helping people do things? Like, it has to become a positive force. And I think that means that like, regulations is such a nasty word, but we need to think about ways in which we like, coordinate and learn how to use it for social good, rather than thinking of it as a mere economic tool. And
Mm.
I think that's the challenge. And especially, like, if we think about social media, I know that in the US, people are freaking out about the TikTok situation, right?
Oh yeah, it's there's actually been a lot of TikToks about the TikTok
Yeah,
situation, and there's one funny one that's like, here are all the issues that the U.S. government, is considering to prioritize, and they get to TikTok on the list, and they freak out and
yeah.
immediately jump on the problem. And I that's not necessarily my commentary, but I'm relaying there's some traffic going outside, the sounds of New York City. But like there's this the meme that's going around that
Yeah,
that is the perception of some people of how it's being handled.
absolutely. And I think that's social media, like TikTok, is a good parallel to how we think about AI, because we were not good at uh, talking about how we should be using Facebook, TikTok, and now that's biting our butt. The conversations that we should have had earlier, which may not necessarily have meant we need more regulation, but thinking about children's safety and disinformation. What is the role of the platforms in this context? And now this is an issue, I think, mainly because China is looming in the background. But then this the whole, like, kerfuffle over TikTok is not necessarily about China, but I think it's about our own anxiety about being able to uh, use social media well, and and making sure that everyone is safe, and using it in a way that's good for a democracy. But we have failed at it, and now we're just pointing at China and saying, okay, the Chinese are coming after us. Let's shut it down. And I fear that about AI, because you know, even like when I was starting my research, AI was like a focal point for policymakers to talk about, okay, this is going to be an area where we compete against the Russians and the Chinese. And it'll be so easy for policymakers to say that, okay, well, our economy is not doing so hot, but we can blame it on AI. So that's why I think we need to talk about this, like, I don't want to call it regulations even, but like how we, like a social agreement on how we use this
Mm.
technology,
Yeah.
like, so that we do it well enough, so that we don't end up like pointing fingers at other entities when,
Policies and guidelines. Yeah.
yeah, like, when things go wrong. We should have these conversations now before things go off the track. That's
Yeah. Yeah,
that's what I
absolutely.
think about competitiveness.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and we won't get a lot into this today, and it's also a topic I'm gonna write about, but I'm also really curious about again, we won't get too deep into it, but I think it'll be really interesting to see education play out with this, because we're already seeing it actually used in a lot of
Mhm.
educational spaces, sometimes in a way that is like boosting learning, and sometimes as a substitution for doing the work, which is not ideal. And so I think
Yeah.
there's going to have to be this thing of how this is used in educational spaces as well, but also there's probably going to end up being like a digital divide, or there
Mhm.
already is a digital divide, but like an AI digital divide, in the way that you kind of talked about. Hey, like, there's water, there's electricity, there's other things that are basic needs. And
Mhm.
what happens when one student has, the parents that have the $20 a month for Claude or ChatGPT, and somebody else's parents don't, and that person knows how to use those tools, and the other person is just using just their pure brain power. Maybe they might learn differently, but if the student who is using AI is actually
Mhm.
using it to learn and not as a substitute for their own work, it does make you think about like how does that change their trajectory in education, even like how they get into like university. So
Mhm.
I think that'll be really interesting to see play out.
I I'm so worried about that because I used to teach a little
Mhm.
when I was a PhD student, and something that comes up over and over again with friends who are still teaching is, students are losing the ability to write.
Mm,
So putting aside the issue of meritocracy, which is a very real one, I feel that every day at at law school because we're getting ranked against each other.
mm.
But putting that aside, right, how will they learn how to write a proper argumentative essay if they're just relying on ChatGPT?
Yes.
Like like that's going to, again, like I feel like we're going back to democracy over and over again, but
Yeah.
I think it'll be an issue for our democracy because if people fail to don't know how to write, how to
Yeah.
read, and come up with an like analytical argument out of something, then
Yeah.
you're doomed. Like you're not gonna be able to function well in our society.
Yeah. And I think it'll be interesting also as how, even how we prompt AI is different. Like there's a tool called Audio Pen. I actually use it. I at
Mhm,
least I'm like I can write, like actually the article I wrote for this, I did not use Audio Pen for this, but you can actually talk to it and it will transcribe what you want. It will actually transcribe into different types of voices and you can control the length.
mhm,
I like using it because I'm recording an audio only course for O'Reilly right now that's based on material I've already presented. So I'm
yeah.
actually just reading out loud the material I've already presented to actually write the scripts. So it's really useful in that way. But even thinking about if students are able to even just like say whatever and AI just like arranges it for them, it definitely takes away that element of learning how to put together a cohesive
Mhm.
argument. So,
Absolutely,
yeah,
because you know how to argue, how to think, like you're very smart, and but like for other students, they didn't have the opportunity to fully get there, and now
yeah,
they have this shiny little tool that says, okay, if you input a few prompts in your notes, then you'll have an essay in like 20 seconds.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. Maybe I'll interview you again for that article. My
Hmm.
last question for you today, is we are also seeing, products that aren't just doing the work of students, but also of like what we call like knowledge workers or like, also often known as like white collar workers, such as like software developers, even like product managers. And, um, there is this looming question if AI will reduce the number of humans needed for jobs. And if unemployment has traditionally been one of the major measures of economic stress or strain, then like how might you know we might have to change how we measure like economic success. And I know you kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of like we
Hmm.
can't just rely on GDP. Also like some of these metrics like unemployment may shift in how much we weight it in terms of a variable. So I'm
Hmm.
curious like your take and like how AI might actually change how we measure like economic success.
Yeah, it's challenging. I feel like I'm saying everything is difficult and convoluted, but everything is. In case of our economic thinking, there are so many presumptions that we make before making a claim about something. For instance, when we talk about economy, we assume that everyone having 8 hours of work every day between Monday to Friday is the norm, and that's how it should be. But should it be like that? I question that because now what if there's not enough work? What if we're just productive enough without having to work 5 days a week, 8 hours each day? What if people can just, now they're testing out the 4 day week work week and such, right? So productivity can be subjective. It could be measured differently. It doesn't have to be fitting into a specific mold. And I think those are the assumptions that we have to challenge first
Mm,
in order to talk about where we how we should go about it, because otherwise, yeah, it's not going to be great, because you know there are some of the rote things that people do could get easily replaced, and it'll be better in some ways. Like for lawyers, I see how AI legal tech can be really helpful,
mm,
because it'll give me the time to maybe focus on things that take a little more thinking and you know, research, as opposed to having to do things that basically machines could be doing. So
yeah.
like it could be good, but it's not going to be good for everyone. And I think that pushes us to think about, maybe we need to think about economy differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, to those of you who are watching the video, this is Dongwoo Kim, who is tell me if I'm getting this wrong, JD candidate at the University of Toronto. I don't remember the
Mhm.
name of the law school.
It's just
Uh,
the faculty of law.
the Faculty of Law.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
Anne Griffin. I'm a product leader. I work in tech, and thank you for joining me for this great conversation on the next 100 years of innovation. Thank you.
Yeah, it was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.